and welcome in to another episode of Heat of the Moment. My name is Micah. I am joined, as always, by my fellow host and friend Lino. We have a fun show for you guys today. We're going to catch up on some news and notes, mostly related to Heat coaches. We're going to talk a little bit about different scenarios that could play out this offseason and what different directions the franchise might take. And then we'll end it with a little draft mulligan game. So we'll be giving the Heat a second chance to see if they could go back. Would they draft somebody else, either a pick before or after the slot that they selected their player in that respective draft? And we'll also use that to kind of learn a little bit about what we might expect the Heat to do in this upcoming draft, since they do have the 20th overall pick. So fun packed episode for you guys. But like I said, we'll start with news and notes. Lino, it was a weird little news cycle for the past couple days for the Heat. It starts with Chris Quinn is named as a Final Four candidate for the Phoenix Suns coaching job, which, if you guys have followed this for a while, Chris has been in the Final Four or five for a couple different coaching positions over the past couple off seasons, so nothing shocking there. But when things got weird, it was reported, I believe, by Barry Jackson, among others, I think Mark
hmm
Stein as well,
Yeah.
that Chris Quinn was one of the final two candidates for the Phoenix Suns coaching job. And around that time, we also got a report that apparently the Heat were showing interest in a EuroLeague coach. He's actually the coach of the Spanish national team, Sergio Scariolo. So it's like, okay, that's interesting. The Heat haven't really pulled like an international guy in a while. This guy's got a great resume. He's coached for the Raptors when they won the championship. So it's all very interesting. And then almost all of that disappears within 12 hours. So then we get a Shams notification saying that, in fact, it's two Cavs assistants that are the final selections for the Phoenix head coaching job, and that Chris Quinn didn't make it. And then Anthony Chang, I believe, of the Miami Herald as well, reports that the Heat don't actually have any interest in Sergio Scariolo. Sorry, I have the pronunciation down. I keep messing it up. But they didn't have any interest in him. So it's like, I had a lot of thoughts on this. I'm like, okay, did they have this guy lined up because Quinny thought he was leaving, and then Quinn came back, so they're like, oh, never mind. Did you have any takes on this weird coaching mix up?
The first take is one of, empathetic pain for Chris Quinn. I don't think anybody wants that guy to be his head coach. He's been trying for a really long time, and it is very difficult to get a head coach job, especially in the NBA. They almost always want to give it to oftentimes a coach that just got fired. I don't understand how that works, but for some reason, NBA teams really want to go with tried and true guys, even if they haven't actually amounted to some kind of success. I think this is one of the more difficult leagues for an assistant coach to really make it to that next step. He's interviewed for a lot of jobs. I feel like at this point, I feel like every season someone's asking to talk to him, but it feels like it's been tough for him to get over the hump there. It was strange because by the time I had seen all the news, all of that had already taken place. And so my timeline and, Twitter is just a disaster right now with how it delivers stuff in general, but was like telling me different tweets in different orders. I was like, I could not keep up with who was actually being interviewed, where were they going, if it was actually happening. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's probably a whole bunch of nothing. Maybe some rumors, started moving around. It is interesting though that a lot of the sources were coming from, Spanish media regarding that coach's opportunities to fly over and interview. So it really, was disappointing to find out it was all false, just because we've talked in recent episodes about how it'd be very exciting to inject some new philosophy and some new outside perspective into this coaching staff. And unfortunately, this probably means we're just going to hire an ex-player from Heat Culture. And so we'll see how that goes. But
Yeah,
overall, that's all I got. Oh
Hassan
my
Whiteside
God.
added to the coaching staff this summer. No, I had the same reaction as you. The point of this process or of this rollout of misinformation that I was most excited about was adding this EuroLeague coach, because apparently he's a very creative, like, tactician with different X's and O's. It seems like it's mostly on defense, which, I'd rather it be like an offensive savant. But still, I thought it was a good sign that it seemed like the organization, probably Spo himself in this hypothetical scenario, thought, okay, we need to inject, just some new opinions, some new points of view into this ecosystem. And
Exactly.
yeah, and apparently that is not what happened. And I do get from Spo's perspective, I shouted out the Memphis Grizzlies for doing this. They added, um, is it Tomas Eliseo, who's now the head coach of
Oh, yeah.
Memphis? They added him. He was a EuroLeague guy, revolutionized their offense and all these different things. And then they fired Taylor Jenkins and just made him the head coach. So I'm sure Spo's like, yeah, don't bring in anybody
We're
that
not
I'm not
bringing
cool with.
anybody. I
Yeah,
know clearly nobody on my coaching staff is getting hired anywhere, so they're definitely not
exactly.
taking my job.
I know that was the other funny thing. There were reports David Fizdale was like at one point involved in the Phoenix Suns head coaching job. So it was Chris Quinn and David Fizdale, two former or one current SPO assistants going at it, which I do wonder if David Fizdale's struggles as a head coach has kind of hurt Chris Quinn because
Mhm.
Pop has such an esteemed coaching tree. All
Yeah.
these different great coaches have come from Pop's staffs, and Spo that haven't really had, too many have success. So I wonder if that hurts a guy like Quinny trying to kind of get over that hump.
Yeah.
So
Which sucks. I feel like Fizdale did a pretty good job in like that first year with the Grizzlies, and really establishing a tone there, and didn't really get to see it through. But yeah, it's probably starting to suffer in the same way that I think now our role players that go out to get new contracts, I think, have also the same connotation of like this is a trick, like
yeah,
this is not real.
yeah, it's almost a testament to how the league perceives Spo's greatness. They're like, this is all Spolster. We don't believe in any of you and your actual quality. So we'll see. But to transition to the next little segment of the show, we're going to do some off-season scenarios. We did this in short a little bit in the last episode, so we'll expand on a little here. There's been reports, including from Shams Charania, saying a lot of people, executives, different front offices are thinking this could be one of the craziest off seasons in NBA history. And so, of course, as a Heat fan, you're like, let's get crazy. Like it has been so stagnant and miserable for several years now. I'd like to get crazy. I'd like something shocking to happen. So we're going to go through a few different scenarios, and I think the place to start, and maybe the place that's the most interesting to look at from a hypothetical standpoint, because we can say from the top it probably won't happen because it's the Heat, but a tank scenario, a full teardown, a full rebuild is something that is at least fun to think about in a hypothetical, because the Heat honestly have a little window here where they could tank. So because they gave their pick to Oklahoma City this year, they have their 2026 pick completely unprotected. And then in 2027, it's lottery protected going to Charlotte. So if you did make it a 2-year tank, you could very easily be in the lottery for 2 straight years. You get your 2 first-round picks, and then maybe you're ready to rock and roll by 2028. Of course, this would probably include trading Bam and Tyler. I think if you're going to truly tear down, it doesn't really make sense to keep either of those guys. Tyler will be up for an extension soon. Bam is in the prime and has a lot of value right now. So, Lino, I mean, it goes without saying this probably won't happen because the Heat don't do this, but in this imaginary realm where this could be a possibility, do you think it's something that makes sense for the Heat, and how would you like to see them navigate something like this?
Yeah, I think that it's something worth considering for sure, especially given the pick scenario. And on top of the picks that we would have over the next 2 years, you also have to consider the picks we would receive for someone like Bam Adebayo or even Tyler Hero. I think there's a scenario where you could keep one of them, and if you were going to keep one of them, it'd probably have to be Tyler. He'd be making less money, would be on the books, not as impactful on the books, and he's a little bit younger, and so his timeline could line up right with whatever happens at the end of the tank, while still having a valuable player at that position. Bam is obviously going to attract way more in the market when it comes to teams that are a Tyler Hero away from a finals appearance. There's probably not many, but there's several teams that are definitely a Bam Adebayo away, and they're probably going to be willing to give up the whole ship for it. So that would also put more picks in this next 2-3 year window, and that would be really enticing and probably the best fit for that scenario. And you could still trade Tyler, of course, but I think when it comes to trading all your stars, I think it really matters to not have a star that's going to win you too many games. And I love Tyler. I've been really impressed with what he's done this year. I think we could keep him and still lose plenty of games to end up in the lottery at this point, especially with how the roster is constructed and if we didn't bring back any actual like real pieces or players. So that is a scenario where I don't necessarily know if we need to trade both of them. It'd probably be the safest bet to trade both of them. And I know Tyler Wood, says he wants to be a Heat lifer for sure, but I'm sure he'd also more so want to be a contender all the time. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. It'll never happen, unfortunately. Like this is just not something that the organization is willing to do at any point in time, but especially not this year where they still have a lot of hope in these guys. But if I saw it, that would be a pretty cool thing. When it comes to the tank scenario, do you feel like there is any need to bring back young players in a trade for Bam and Tyler? Do you feel like would it be more valuable to try to get as many picks as possible, or see if we could get a blue chip young guy from a different team? Like, let's say if we go get Jared McCain or Alex Sarr from one of these teams that are still kind of at the beginning of their rebuild.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I think picks will always be enticing because of how well the Heat have drafted, which we'll cover later in the show. But they've shown the ability to hit on picks in the lottery and late in the first round, so that would be enticing. But there's been a thought process thrown around a lot lately. I've seen a lot from Five Reasons Sports. So I want to shout them out specifically. But the idea of could the Heat recreate a version of how the Thunder acquired Shea Gilgeous-Alexander or how the Pacers acquired Tyrese Halliburton, right? You know, the
Mhm.
Thunder traded away Paul George, established All-Star, got Shea and a bunch of picks. The Pacers traded away a lower level All-Star, but still an All-Star in Domantas Sabonis and got back, a promising young guard, but I don't think many people saw Halliburton reaching these heights, right? And the same thing with Shea, definitely a lot of promise, but MVP was not on a lot of people's bingo cards. So are there young guys out there that maybe the Heat really loved in the draft and just didn't have a high enough pick, or somebody they just really think could flourish and is younger than Tyler, is not as far along on his financial cycle. He's not up for his rookie max extension. He's maybe still on his rookie deal. Things like that are interesting. Those guys, I mean, obviously, if we could pick out the guy that's going to turn into an MVP that hasn't made an all-star team right now, we wouldn't be having a podcast. We would be in a front office. But I did think of one fake trade I thought would be interesting. And I've seen this floated around other places, so not claiming this is an original idea, but Jaden Ivey is somebody that is very athletic, was a top 10, top 5 pick, has some potential. And the Pistons, maybe more importantly, are one of those teams that I feel like could convince themselves that Tyler Hero could really elevate them. So if they were, like Malik Beasley was just awesome for the Pistons, but you could bring in Tyler, somebody that brings just as much shooting and then even more creation off the dribble, scoring, secondary playmaking alongside Cade. I think Tyler's a good fit in Detroit. And then you get back Jaden Ivey. You'd have to take Tobias Harris for salary matching purposes. And then maybe you even get compensated with a pick or something. I don't really know how the league would value Ivy versus Hero, but maybe that's something they could look at. And then the other version, well, I guess I'll let you respond to that first. Do you have any thoughts on that type of trade, like kind of looking for a young guy that just it hasn't totally clicked yet for him? And is Tyler somebody you think you'd be willing to give up in that kind of scenario?
I think that probably is the closest matchup that you could have to being parallel with the Tyrese Halliburton trade and the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander trade. I think people still saw a little bit more in both of those players than what we've seen in Jaden Ivey so far. I think that was the thing about Halliburton early on was that he was really, really good, but him, Deere, and Fox next to each other just didn't really like make a lot of sense. And that parallel there is kind of there with Cade and Jaden. Like I don't exactly know that they both bring a lot of different things to the table, but I thought it was less clear that De'Aaron Fox was the better player than Tyrese Halliburton right off the bat. And then Gilgeous-Alexander, that's kind of a mixed bag. I don't think anybody really saw this. People keep talking about how they saw it come in and they're excited that it's here. And I'm excited for him to be the player that he's turned out to be. If I had to bet that Jaden Ivey was going to turn out that way, I'd say probably not. Would I still do it? I'm leaning towards no if I'm just trying to trust my gut feeling about do I really believe in this guy. I just don't get that same level of excitement that I was pretty excited and disturbed at how the Kings traded Tyrese Halliburton. He
Right.
kind of seemed like a star to me at first. He was making like averaging like 9, 10 assists a game in his
Yeah.
rookie season, playing with another dominant ball first point guard. And so that felt more obvious to me. And that's really was just the Kings being the Kings. The Detroit Pistons could be the Detroit Pistons and help us out here. And if it happened, I'd be very interested to see how it turned out. I don't think we'd see the same level of success, though.
Yeah, I think that's all well said, and it is a good reminder that, yeah, when that trade happened, like, I've looked up my tweets from that day, and I'm like, "Kings, no, what are you doing?" And so that the equivalent to that for Tyler, I feel like would be closer to something like Tyler for a Mint Thompson or something, where,
Mhm.
like, the whole NBA world would be like, "What? No,
Yeah,
Rockets!"
that
Like,
one I was like, I would
yeah.
want now that is actually that gives me my counterpoint. I would do it for a Sar Thompson.
Ooh.
You
I
know,
don't
some
think the
people
Pistons would, but that would be sick.
I think it's kind of 50-50 out there with Asar Thompson. People don't think he's as good as his brother, they don't really believe in the offensive skill set as much as they believe in Amon's. But I would definitely take a shot at that and let him be something that we build around because I think he's an incredible player, honestly. Defensively, he's amazing, and that would just be really fun. I would get a lot of excitement out of that,
Yes.
and I feel like we could trick the Lions, the Detroit Pistons into doing that
Give us Jameer Gibbs for Tyler
right
Hero.
now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's not something I want to happen per se. And I think a lot of this discussion will be interesting to have because there is the completely analytical version of this discussion, and then there's the fan side of it. And of course, analytically, yeah, the Heat are nowhere close to being a contender. There's probably no one move that could make them a contender. So you would say in a vacuum, just tear down, just tank it out as best you can, and hopefully get a top 3 pick and a blue chip guy and rebuild that way. But we know that's not necessarily how the Heat operate, and that's just not how real life works. So yeah,
Mhm.
if I got the notification we traded Tyler for Jaden Ivey, I'm just not a huge Ivy guy. Like, and I just
Yeah.
don't see that many huge Ivy guys like Brian Schroeder, Brian J Draft, I think on Twitter is like my favorite draft person. He's really good at what he does. And at the draft, he was so high on Halliburton and Shea at their respective drafts. And he was not that on Ivy. So like if there was some guy that was like, no, Ivy's a superstar. Like you guys, it's not just hasn't clicked yet. I feel better about it. I don't know if Ivy has that potential, but we'll see. And then yeah, Bam trades. I mean, like we discussed, we could get a lot more for Bam. Like, I mean, the Pistons don't make sense because they have Duran. But like the Spurs, Bleacher Report had a fake Bam trade with Bam going to San Antonio for Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, and 4 first-round picks. I don't think any of those first-round picks would have been the second overall pick in this draft. Obviously, love Bam as a fan. I don't want him to get traded. But this is the kind of offer to where if this came across my feed and I was like 4 first, Vassell and Sohan, who are at least slightly promising younger players, you would be like, okay, the Heat are tearing down, and at least they got good value back from Bam. I'm sure the Spurs want Giannis and different guys, but those are kind of the ideas. And then if you move Tyler and Bam off the team, of course, you're going to be able to lose a lot of games.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that would help. This I almost wonder too. Like I don't feel like I mean the whole organization wouldn't want this, but I feel like Spo especially is like I'm not going to coach 82 games of a tank. Like I
Yeah.
almost wonder if this is something that could happen down the road when Spo does shift to the front office, or and
Mhm.
he's like, oh, now that I'm in this seat, like I want draft picks to play with.
Yeah.
Like so
Yeah. Yeah. I find there's so many things in the way of us actually tanking that it's fun to have these conversations, but it's hard to put a lot of stock into it. Like, and I don't want to mislead the fan base into thinking this is something that could really happen.
right.
Ultimately, this is a long shot away, and I'd
Yes.
be very surprised. And of course, as we say that, they're probably calling up the Spurs right now. I would be surprised if we ended this pod and got a tweet that just says the Miami Heat are tanking because Micah and Lino said they would never do it.
Exactly.
But the Bam trade is interesting because there's so many different options at that point. If we were to get to the point of trading Bam, there's so many teams that need him. The Spurs have a very interesting package. I think that the Sixers might take a look about getting rid of Embiid. bringing in Bam, trying something different there. Though I don't know what all they'd give away besides draft assets, or trying to send us Embiid, which would be a crazy swap, Bam for Embiid. There's teams out in the West that could use centers. The Nuggets probably need a center that, or like a power forward or something. That would be insane. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to just play that imagination game with something that is so far fetched with this organization, but that
Yes.
is kind of what it would look like. Is just getting rid of those two guys, bringing in a lot of picks, and then probably trying to build around a new young guy.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we're going to talk about three scenarios, and this one definitely feels the least likely. So we definitely, if any Heat fans at this point are not understanding us, we do not think this will happen. Just for the discussion's sake, it was interesting. Next up, this is the stand pat scenario, stand pat
Mhm.
Riley, if you will. And the main goal of this would be to perpetuate the team's standard from the last few years, right? So, not including the 2023 finals run, more the standard set of being a play in team, whether that's the seventh seed or the 10th seed, somewhere in that range. So, what are some things the Heat could do to kind of stay where they are? And also, I would guess in this scenario, duck the luxury tax because they know they're not good enough to win a title. So, why be a tax team? The first thing that comes to mind, and this is a trade we probably should discuss just because it has been on the timeline a lot. DeMar DeRozan. The Heat have been rumored to be a DeMar DeRozan suitor for a long time, back to when Kyle Lowry was on the team. DeMar is still a good NBA player, a serviceable guy. I don't think he's changing your ceiling very much as a team. Some of the fake trades you'll see floated around or basically revolve around Terry Rozier, who's an expiring contract. DeMar, I believe, has a partially guaranteed year left after this upcoming season. So he has a little more money left on the books than Terry. So it would provide Sacramento some cap relief. And then I'm assuming some type of asset would have to be included, whether that's the 20th pick in this upcoming draft or some kind of protected future first, maybe just a few seconds. It's hard to really gauge what DeRozan's value would be. They would probably re-sign Davion Mitchell in this situation and essentially run it back with the same team, except in Rozier's spot, you would have DeRozan, which would be helpful. I mean, DeRozan would be a huge upgrade over Terry,
Mhm.
but we were the 10th seed last year. This might move us to the 7th seed or, the 8th seed, something like that. So, Lino, I know this is kind of what the Heat have done for the past few off seasons. What would you think if, we get to October and it's like, oh, this is the roster. Like it's DeRozan. We're at training camp. Nothing else happened. How would you feel? And what's the likelihood of something like this happening, do you think?
All basketball IQ aside, I'd love to have a DeRozan jersey. That'd be kind of sick. But everything else is probably going to be a little miserable. That is not going to be a very fun season to watch. That does not necessarily improve any aspect of our situation. Defensively, not really at all. Offensively, we'd have, some better mid-range shooting, which is great. Maybe some much more clutch shooting at the end of games, and perhaps better execution late game. I think DeRozan, tends to do things right at the end
I
of
see
games.
you talking yourself into it.
I have to like work my way around this. Let me cook. Um, and that is the thing we struggled with last year. Bam and Tyler both really kind of suffered when it came to, oh, I have to be the guy right now. It's a 5 point game. I need to make the right shot, or I need to make a tough shot. Tyler has a history of taking the wrong shots and missing the much needed ones. Bam has a history of, trying a little too hard to make some really tough mid range shots. And DeRozan has a history of doing those things relatively well. And so having somebody like that does have its value. It's just not going to get us very far from where we were. So don't love it. Would be better than nothing, but
Yeah.
yeah.
That I think that is the question too, is it better than nothing? Because from like a mental health standpoint, it definitely is better than nothing. Because if they roll into training camp with this roster, I think the entire fan base would be freaking out.
Mhm.
But you could say there's an argument though that Terry's contract being an expiring $26 million contract might be more valuable to take into the actual season and up to the trade deadline to maybe make a move for someone. But that's a few steps down the line. I think, yeah, it's one of those things. Like if this happens the first day of, or even like at the draft, like if we kick off the offseason with our only move being DeRozan, that would be pretty rough. But yeah, if Giannis goes off the board, if Durant goes off the board, if there's this crazy NBA offseason, somehow, all the musical chairs are taken up except for DeRozan, then I guess, the Heat could settle for that. Which again, he's a good player. He would help the Heat. It's just I don't think he's changing too much about their season. So that's the stand pat version of it. Is it the most likely to happen? Probably. I mean, it's the most
Yeah.
realistic. Like I don't love it, but he is acquirable. I don't think like the Heat definitely have what it would take to get him.
Mhm.
So we'll see, and we can kind of talk about everyone or all the options in totality at the end. The final option, and of course, the option is Heat fans we all want is the all in scenario. Something the stars align, the Heat are able to basically send out every future asset they have available to bring in a star player. Now, for my version of this, I still went with Durant. Now, I know some people will say like Durant's 37. Is that really like an all in move? Well, it's all in because you're trading for a very old player who you're probably going to have to give an extension. So it's very all in that aspect. And I mean, we could talk about like John Morant, Trey Young, Giannis, like those guys potentially could be available, but we know Durant is available right now. We know Giannis is out of the Heat's like price range for what they
Yeah.
have asset wise. So I thought Durant made sense. And the all-in version of the Durant trade is the version we talked about last week, where is probably included, which that's
Mhm.
definitely painful. Like where has a lot of upside. I assume maybe multiple firsts in addition to where would be included. Of course, this is all completely hypothetical. But it basically would be okay. The Heat are saying, forget the future. We're just going all in. We're basically extending the Jimmy window by replacing Jimmy with a player of a similar caliber, probably slightly better caliber, depending on their age and health, kind of how you rate that. So if we get to October, same hypothetical, and we traded Wiggins, Duncan, Ware, and a first. We have Kevin Durant. We're starting some lineup of some facsimile of like Davion, Tyler, Haywood, Durant, Bam. How you feeling?
I feel pretty good. I'll say like I think all Heat fans should probably pick the thing that they want the most and be ready to be happy about it if it happens. There's, I think, a lot of fans out there who will probably just be miserable no matter what the team does, despite the limited options. I think everybody should really take a second and think about what would you like to see happen that's actually realistic, and if that were to happen, have some excitement about it. It's the whole point of sports is to be excited. Part of the whole point of being a fan is to be miserable every once in a while, but you don't have to be miserable all the time. And I'll say, if Kevin Durant was in a Miami Heat jersey, I'd be very excited about it, even if it's the last stage of his career. Because another aspect that I'd be very excited about is just that I would know when it was coming to an end. Kevin Durant hits 40. There's nothing more that he can give us. Bam is 30 something at that point. Tyler is, in his early 30s, I think, at that point as well. And they're probably not going to try to extend them once more. Like that is going to be it. We'll have a clear timeline of this iteration of the Miami Heat with its last final, move. I think it deserves that. I think it could be exciting. I think KD's still a really good player even at this stage of his career. People still harp on the age of players as if it's still the early 2000s or the late 90s and guys just kind of die off after they hit 35. We've just seen a whole generation of players still be the best players in the league. Just at the last Olympics, like all those guys are like 35 and up, and look what they're able to do on a global stage. Kevin Durant is still possible. Is still capable of being an incredible basketball player, and I would be very excited to see him next to Bam and Tyler because I do think he addresses a lot. He brings some elite scoring, and again, that fourth quarter consistency way more than DeRozan does. It would just be really fun for the most part, and at least interesting and showing some signs of life from the front office. But where would you be at with a trade like that if that were to happen this season?
Yeah, I think it sounds probably a little entitled to say I'd like to get Durant for a certain cost, but that is
Mm-hmm.
how I feel. I think like you said, if we acquire Durant, I'll be excited as long as like Spo isn't in the deal.
Yeah,
So I'll be like, okay, cool. Like this is an all time great. It helps kind of extend this competitive window. But yeah, the follow up tweet for like everything that was included in the deal, I will definitely be waiting for very nervously because yeah, if it, like Phoenix and Durant don't seem like they're on a great, on the great page right now. Maybe Durant's like a total jerk about it. He's like, listen, I'm an expiring contract. Send me to Miami. If you don't send me to Miami, I'm gonna freak out. I'm not gonna report to camp, whatever. And then yeah, maybe it's just like Wiggins, Duncan, and the 20th pick, Wiggins, Duncan, and like a protected pick. If it's something like that, then I'm thrilled. If Ware has to be included, I'm like, all right, Pat, like you're really
that
going
would
for
suck.
this. Yeah, I don't think this is wise. Like, but I get it. The East is open. Like, I get going all in. But yeah, my hope would be they're able to acquire him without having to include Ware, without having to include anything super valuable. Jaquez, Nico, I'd understand that. But yeah, Ware and then like future unprotected first would make me a little queasy. So
Yeah,
we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, my closing thoughts just on kind of all these scenarios in general is I think they highlight to get to title contention, barring something unprecedented, the Heat are, in my opinion, multiple transaction cycles away. Right. So if they take the tank option, obviously that'll be a long time to rebuild. If they stand pat, they won't be a title contender. And even if they go all in, even if they got Durant, I don't think that makes them a title contender. I think it would take some other pickup at the trade deadline or even next summer to really elevate them. So I think that's the best value in this exercise is to realize, other than some crazy stars aligning this summer, we're not going to get to October and be like, oh, the Heat are a title contender. Like, we can clip this. I would love to be wrong, but I think it's going to be multiple transaction cycles away before we can really feel like, okay, this team's ready to compete with Oklahoma City, well, I was going to say Boston, Indiana, I guess, even Cleveland. Obviously, they handled us quite painfully.
yeah.
Uh,
Even though they're
so
frauds, we got killed by some frauds.
yeah,
Shame.
it is.
What
So
a shame.
yeah, that's my thought though. Is the Heat are probably like all fans know, kind of far away from getting in contention, but just winning the championship isn't everything. If they get Kevin Durant and they're like the 4 seed and can make the second round, maybe the conference finals, that would be cool. So we'll see. Before we transition to the next part of the show, one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this is kind of off the top of my head, but it's just something that's been on my mind lately, especially regarding like a Durant trade.
Mhm.
Jimmy's departure, does it feel like is as good as Tyler and Bam are that window is completely shut now, and that trying to get someone like Durant is kind of just trying to like open back up the kind of competitive window that was created when we had Jimmy?
Oh, absolutely. I think the one thing I've been ignoring through this whole season is that it's Gojo over for sure. Um, we had 2 finals appearances. You don't get more than that. Even if Jimmy stayed, like, you just don't get to go to the finals over and over and over again. You get as close as you can, and then that's probably as close as you get unless you get over the hump. And this, by the time you've been to 2 finals, you've probably completely destroyed your body, as we've seen take place with Jimmy Butler and some of our older players. It's tough to get there. It's like the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl's probably harder to get to, but you don't, unless you're Pat Mahomes, you just don't get to keep going back and trying again. And most teams, that was their one shot with that iteration of that roster. And I think we've definitely hit that limit with this roster. It'd be as a team, you can't really think that way. Like, you have to keep trying. Like, there's nothing to do but to try. Um, but statistically speaking, it's kind of cooked for the most part.
Yeah, that's it. It's tough, and I think the point of the team being multiple transaction windows away is meaningful in that regard because maybe there is some scenario where somehow down the line like they find a couple more Khalil Wares and they actually get like a pretty good treasure trove of good young players. And maybe the next Giannis, actually, there is a reasonable Heat package that's available. Maybe all our picks and swaps are available. Tyler and Bam are still in their prime and they're able to bring in the next Jimmy. But it does feel a little bit like grasping at straws right now. Now, right from this vantage point, we can't really see that exact
Mhm.
vision. It doesn't mean you immediately have to tear it down, but I get why some fans feel that way, because it's like, well, you can't win with just Tyler and Bam. You'd have to trade one of them to get somebody good, and then you only have two good players. So we're stuck. There's nothing to do. We need to tank. I get that it's like you have to kind of imagine a couple steps down the road to really figure out what's going on. But yeah, I won't lie. There's some times I'm like, man, when 22 left, like that just might have been it. Like
Yeah.
it's
It
it.
might have been it before 22 left. When 22 went down in the playoffs the
Well,
previous year, that really was it.
that's a great point by you. Yeah, I'm not saying that if Jimmy was happy they extend him, we would have been in the finals last year either. That's a great point. The window was probably closed, and Jimmy's leaving was more symbolic of the
Yeah.
window closing or
Yeah, that's
having
how I
been
look at it, at least. I
closed.
mean, look at that OKC team with Russ, KD, and James freaking Harden. You look at that team, you say this team has 100 shots at the finals,
Right.
and they just don't. Like you get to capture lightning in a bottle once, maybe twice, unless you're one of the greatest players of all time. That is it. That's the only few people who get to go over and over and over again. And the OKC is going to the finals now, and look how different that team is compared to where that team was just 7 years ago. They didn't get to do it a whole bunch. They kind of had to go through a lot of stuff, and we're a much more successful organization than the Oklahoma City Thunder, and we have that to hang our hat on. And fans have a reason to be able to believe we can kind of make a bunch of something out of nothing. But the likelihood is that we're just trying to build towards success so that when our opportunity comes up again, we're ready to take advantage of it. So,
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, it's being prepared for the next opportunity while not necessarily knowing what exactly that's going to be, which requires patience from the fan base, which is, it's tough to ask for fans, but it is something to keep in mind. So yeah, good discussion there about where the Heat are. Um, and now we transition to the draft. So the draft is this month. We're now in June. The draft is one of my favorite times of the basketball season, other than the actual basketball happening, because it's just fun to learn about all kind of new players, what their different quirks are, different abilities. And next episode, we will be doing, probably, unless we trade the pick, a full draft breakdown. We'll be looking at all the different mocks and players mocked to the Heat, who we'd like for them to take or maybe avoid. But to look forward, we must first look to the past. And what we're going to go through is the last 10 or so drafts and see what the Heat have done in those drafts, and whether we appreciate what they did, whether we wish they would have done something differently had they been given different opportunities, and use that to inform us of what we think they may do on June 26th. So, how we're going to do it is we're going to tell you the player taken before the Miami Heat's pick, the actual Heat pick, and then the player after. And we're going to discuss, did they make the right call? Should they have done something different if they somehow were able to take the player taken before or after them with what we know now? So, to start off, we'll start with 2024, the most recent draft. As everyone knows, the Heat selected Khalil Ware. Before Khalil Ware was Bub Carrington. If you listen to the show, somebody Lino and I were both quite fond of. And after Khalil Ware was Jared McCain, who certainly would have won Rookie of the Year had he not gotten injured. So actually three very solid picks right there. Lino, what are your feelings on what the Heat ended up doing? Would you change what they would have done here if you could?
if I could go back and do anything, it would be to find Joe Cronin and give him a knuckle sandwich, put him in the walls of Jericho or something crazy. For those who don't know or weren't there or weren't paying attention, the Blazers had the 14th pick at the time, and I believe the Wizards had a pick after us, or maybe the 16th, maybe a couple picks later. The Blazers decided to trade their pick, the one right before us, the one where we probably would have taken Bub Carrington if he was still there, traded back to wherever the Wizards were and gave them the pick so that they could jump us to take Bub Carrington, the player that I was probably most excited about in the draft. And after that, a rookie of the year candidate was picked after Khalil Ware. But with all that being said, if I could go back, I'd probably still draft Khalil Ware, especially given how this season's gone for him. I think he's had a really strong season. I think, some people draft the best player available. Some people draft towards, needs of the roster. I'm kind of a needs of the roster guy at this stage. Like when you're in the middle back section of the draft, picks 12 and up, or 12 and down, rather, however you look at it. At the 15th pick, I thought Khalil Ware really addressed a superior need that we had on the team. And so was very excited to bring him in. Was, kind of sad that one Jared McCain ended up being as great of a player as he is. And Bub Carrington honestly turned the season into a pretty productive one, but I think we got the guy that we needed. What about you?
Yeah, I like Jared McCain a lot coming into the draft. Loved his TikToks. Very charming young man. So yeah, I wanted Jared McCain there, and then of course Jared McCain was awesome, way better than I would have even expected. He doesn't fit great with Tyler, but I do think just going forward, I think if the Heat called up the Sixers right now and they're like, "We'll trade you Khalil Ware for Jared McCain," the Sixers would be like, "No." So I think I'd probably take McCain there just because I think he's the best player. But this is one where like I don't lose any sleep over this. Like Khalil, I think will be a very solid player for a long time. Next up, 2023 draft. This one has changed quite a bit through the years. At 17, the Lakers took Jalen Hood Shafino. At 18, the Miami Heat selected Jaime Jaquez Jr. And at 19, the Warriors selected Brandon Pajimski. So this one it's like a stock or something. Like you've just seen these values of these guys just go back and forth. To be fair, Jalen Hood Shafino has never really been in the equation, but yeah, rookie season, Jaime Jaquez Jr. and Brendan Pajimski both seemed great. Like there were quotes about like Steve Kerr and Eric Spoelstra joking back and forth, like, I like the guy you drafted. I like the guy you drafted. It seems like both these teams were going to take one of these two guys. It just depended on who the Heat took first. And then I feel like Jaime maybe elevated past Pajimski towards the end of last season. Like he looked really strong, looked like he was really ready to maybe be a starter for the team. And then this season, they both start out pretty rough. And then Jaime, Heat fans know what happened. And then Pajimski looked awesome down the stretch. He looked like a really solid role player. So, I mean, and unless you have anything to add, I fear Pajimski was definitely should have been the pick here.
Yeah, I think so. I It's so sad. Maybe the story's not over. Maybe Jaime Jaquez Jr. decides to turn it all around. He's training with one of your favorite trainers. Who is it? Chris Hanlon?
Chris Brickley,
Chris
not
Brickley,
Hamlin. Chris
whichever one.
Brickley.
Why are
Shout
they
out
all named
Brickley.
Chris? The trainers got to get new names. But yes, he's in the lab. He's in the studio. He's putting the work in. Hopefully, that will produce something because he'll need it if he wants to stay in the NBA. So yes, probably looking back would go with Brandon Pajimski. It'd be a great guard to have in our guard core right now. And shout out to him for surviving so far.
So, next year, 2022, this one I feel very good about what the Heat did. As much later in the draft, number 26, Wendell Moore Jr., number 27, Nico Jovic, and number 28, Patrick Baldwin Jr. I think Nico clearly the pick here. The other guys haven't been able to produce very much in their NBA career, and Nico has dealt with some health issues, but when he's been on the court, it's looked quite promising, I think.
Yeah, he's definitely the far and away better player of these three. Especially given the fact that we're talking about the 27th pick in the draft. This is very, very late in the draft, and he's played some really meaningful basketball for us up to this point. And so I think we've always shown great success in finding the right players at this stage in the draft. Funny enough, I was very high on Wendell Moore Jr. and was sad to see that we didn't pick him, but this is why I do not have a job in the NBA.
Next year, 2021, the Heat did not have a pick. That will be a theme as we go on. 2020, arguably the most painful, especially for me specifically. Number 19, Sadiq Bey, dealt with some injuries, but it's shown he can at least be a somewhat productive player. Number 20, the Heat selected Precious Achua. He's on the Knicks now. Didn't work out. He's part of the Kyle Lowry trade, so he kind of helped in that way. And then number 21 from Kentucky, Tyrese Maxey, already been an all-star. It looks to be one of the better young up and coming players in this league. And again, I reference for me specifically, this one is ultra painful because I was super high on Maxi. I had him like top
You were so
three in this
excited.
draft. And as the draft was happening, I was like, oh my God, it's perfect. He's falling right to the Heat. I can't believe all these teams are passing on him. Like, I thought he could go top 10. He's gonna fall all the way to us at 20. And he did. And then we took Precious. And then the very next pick, Philly took him, and he's looked awesome ever since. Really saved. I mean, Philly obviously is in despair right now, but really like changed their fortune and let them have any kind of success, because if he didn't come on like that, Embiid wouldn't have had a running mate after Harden. It would have gotten dark. So
Yeah.
kind of saved Philly and hurt me
Yes.
in the process.
To the Heat's credit, Precious Achiuwa coming out of the draft, starting that year, was the particular archetype of player we needed. We figured out, I think Bam was really going to be a guy, and we I don't remember who we had backing up next to him. Were we still paying James Johnson to be a power forward at that point in time? There were question marks at the 4 or 5 spot, and we needed to add depth there. It's the 20th pick. It's a kind of a shot in the dark. It's a huge miss, though, and we definitely should have taken Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah, it was painful at the time. And this is a trend we should note. The Heat are not afraid to draft a player at a position where they have an established veteran. Like, one of
Mhm.
Achua's comps coming out was Bam, right? Like, he was
Yeah.
this guy that's like an undersized center, but was like pretty switchable, had shown like maybe some on-ball skills. So a lot of Heat fans were like, okay, this guy can't shoot. Bam can't shoot. These guys can't play together. Why did you like, the ceiling for this is a good backup center? Like, so those kind of things were why the pick itself was frustrating. And then of course Pressure's not
Mhm.
working out, and Maxi being so good made it extra frustrating.
Yeah.
But just the year before that, 2019, one of the best draft moments in Heat history, probably. Number 12, PJ Washington, very good player, actually, who I wanted the Heat to take in this draft. One of the many guys I wanted them to take instead of who they took. At number 13, Tyler Hero, who obviously has been awesome. He's an all-star. And then number 14, the Celtics took Romeo Langford. I believe it was the Celtics. So that's crazy to think about how close Tyler was to being a Celtic. But yeah, I mean, home run. I mean, maybe like the worst Tyler haters would rather have PJ Washington, but I mean, Tyler's been an all-star. He's a very good player.
All-star. And that rookie year was amazing in the bubble. He's a finals contributor. He's made an all-star team, 3-point champion. Like, he's done a lot for this team. And at the 13th pick, there's not a lot of guys drafted at that spot who've seen as much success as he has so far.
Yeah. Number, or in the year 2018, we didn't have a pick. 2017 was the Bam draft. Number 13 was Donovan Mitchell. Obviously love Bam, but probably going to take Donovan Mitchell if you could. Then at number 15 was Justin Jackson, who I had totally forgotten about.
Oh,
Fun fact, that's who I wanted the Heat to take in this draft. He had size, he could shoot. I was like, oh, this is a good fit. I honestly didn't
I
know a
was
lot
gonna
about
name
them.
I was gonna name this episode "Do the Heat Suck at Drafting?" and what I should name it is "Do Micah and Lino Suck at Draft Prospecting?" Because I was
It's
so wrong on so many of these.
I know. So yeah, I mean, obviously, Bam, awesome pick to get an all-star, multi-time Olympic gold medalist at 14 is great work. Donovan Mitchell just is a weirdly great number 13 overall pick. So no shame
Mhm.
there. 2016, they didn't have a pick. 2015, probably the one closest to my heart. Number 9, the Charlotte Hornets were offered a boatload of draft picks so the Celtics could trade up and take Justice Winslow. They declined. Michael Jordan hung up the phone, took Frank Kaminsky, and then Justice Winslow fell to the Heat at 10. I was once again thrilled. I had watched, I wasn't like as into like scouting at this point, so I just watched the tournament. Duke had won the championship. I was just like, this guy's amazing. How did he fall to 10? Like, I was hoping we could maybe get Stanley Johnson. Instead, we get Justice Winslow. I'm thrilled. The very next pick is Miles Turner. Obviously, had a much better career than Justice. And then, just as an extra stab, a couple picks later, Devin Booker was taken at number 13. There's been multiple reports, even from Booker himself, who thought he was going to Miami. The Heat worked him out. I don't even think the Heat worked out Justice. I think they were shocked he fell to them and just they jumped on the opportunity. There's all kind of symmetry where like Booker could have taken over the 2 guard spot from Dwayne, learned under him. A path not taken that I think about at least once a week.
It haunts my dreams. It certainly haunts my dreams. That one might be an all-time miss as far as it's hard to blame the Miami Heat at that point, but that was probably the biggest deficit from talent to what we could have had. And I love Justice Winslow. Even I love watching him play. It was kind of
Oh
sad the
yeah,
way his career turned out, and he was a pivotal part of some really rough Miami Heat teams, but he was there and doing all he could. And who knows,
we
maybe his career is different if he's actually surrounded with real talent and not having to
Yeah,
be the
well,
best
and
player.
healthy. Like, I
Yeah, and
mean,
healthy.
don't
The
don't let
groin
me
and the
get on
hip
my
and the
soapbox,
yeah.
but yeah, I still think Justice like a good NBA player. Like, not like maybe not even a starter, but he definitely should be in an NBA rotation somewhere. The injuries just robbed him of that, which is really unfortunate. And I also, well, yeah. Anyway, he had a great. I think it was a Players Tribune article where he talked about some of like the off court, mental health stuff he struggled
Mhm.
with. So
Oh, I
there's a
remember
lot of
that. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of things that went into it, but still rooting for Justice. I think he's still on the Bucks G League team, so maybe he's able to carve himself out a role in the league at some point. The next draft was 2014. If anybody remembers this draft, it was the Shabazz Napier draft.
Ooh, buddy.
At least historically, what people think happened is LeBron was like, "Oh, I like Shabazz Napier, draft Shabazz Napier," and the Heat were like, "Ah, it's the 24th pick. Sure, LeBron, here you go." And LeBron was like, "All right, enjoy Shabazz. I'm going to Cleveland." So, is
Yeah.
that actually what happened? Who knows? The pick before Shabazz was Rodney Hood. I think Hood probably had a better career than Napier. And then the pick after him was Clint Capella, who is still a pretty productive center in the league. So obviously Capella would have been a lot better, but
Yeah, I don't know. I
hindsight.
wish we had I won. I wish we weren't 18 when that draft happened. I
Right.
didn't know too much about the draft at all at that point in time. Just heard the story that LeBron forced us to bring in Shabazz, and then I wish I would have known who we were thinking about drafting otherwise. That would have been very
Yeah.
interesting to find out. And if I could ever interview a front office guy from the Miami Heat, that's one of my first questions, is
Yeah.
who we were thinking about bringing before LeBron twisted our arms.
Right.
But yeah, definitely would have went with Clint Capella there.
Yeah. So, and now we're getting into big three territory. So you saw, Shabazz 24th overall pick. 2013 didn't have a pick. 2012 trade the pick away, and then 2011, the first year of the big three, the Heat take Norris Cole at number 28. Good pick that late in the draft. Everybody knows Norris was a solid backup point guard for those big three Heat teams. Provided good minutes for some championship teams. The pick before was Jawan Johnson, who just frankly I don't remember. And then number 29 is Corey Joseph, who honestly was kind of similar to Norris Cole, and I think it's still in the league now. So I guess you could argue they should have taken Corey Joseph. But in the twist of all twists, the funniest part of all of this, the very next pick in that draft, number 30 overall, was in fact Jimmy Butler. So there was a world that easily could have happened where LeBron, Dwayne, Chris Bosh, and Jimmy Butler were all on a team together, and the
Man.
Heat have, I don't know, 6 championships right now. So that would have been cool, I
That would have
guess.
been some great. I actually didn't realize that that was that draft or that he'd been drafted that long ago.
Yeah, so
Man,
that's the Heat's draft history. I think my main takeaways are the Heat are fairly unpredictable when it comes to drafting. The past probably going back to like 2017, 2015, I followed it pretty closely, kind of had my own like Heat big board of who I wanted them to take. And I've
mm,
basically been wrong every time except for
same.
Justice when I was wrong in a different kind of way. So, they've shown they'll take developmental guys. Like Nico was definitely like a project who they've developed into a role player. They'll take more experienced guys. They took Jaime, who was kind of like ready to contribute immediately. They'll draft guys at positions they already have. They took Khalil Ware when in theory Bam was already their center. Same thing with Precious when they had Bam. Same thing with Bam when they had Hassan. So, and same thing with Dwayne when they had Eddie Jones. There's a
Yeah,
history of this. So yeah, we'll see what happens in this draft. And like I said, next episode we'll get some actual scouting thoughts to you guys. Of course, we will try and read and digest information from people that do this for a living and give it to you. We will not pretend like we've been watching these guys play since their junior year of high school, but it will be fun. I've already started to look into a few of these prospects, and there are some really fun guys that could
nice.
be available to the Heat at 20. So, Lino, do you have any closing thoughts on this little
Yeah,
offseason
I think,
exhibition.
really the only other thing to say is besides, like, maybe day of, the Miami Heat are relatively leak proof when it comes to the draft. I don't know if it's ever leaked what their pick was going to be or even who they were really seriously considering. Almost every year, I've probably been following the draft around the same amount of time with that amount of seriousness, since probably like the 2015 draft is probably really when I locked in there. But for the most part, I always watch big boards online, and it's never the person that they have in that spot. So I don't know if that's just the way it is for all teams, and that a lot of these draft guys are just wrong when it comes to their mocks. But if anything, if you want to find out who we're not going to draft, I would watch all the big board videos on YouTube.
Yeah, and my family and friends would also tell you, just look at who I like the least in the class, and that is who the Heat are going to take. There are famous videos of me in my friends' living rooms watching Tyler Hero get selected and freaking out because I'd told everyone for weeks, just take anybody but Tyler Hero. And of course,
Of
that
wingspan.
ended up being awesome. I did the same thing with Jaime, who, I mean, he was great. I like Jaime,
I
like you
think I
said.
still have our text messages from when Jaime Jaquez got drafted. We were both
Cam
particularly
Whitmore.
disturbed.
Cam
And we're
Whitmore is still on the board. He's very promising young player. Anyway, and then Kalel, I was fine with. Kalel was cool. He wasn't like, somebody I really didn't want them to take. So, anyway, getting too into the weeds. We appreciate everyone for tuning in. We'd love to hear from you guys as far as the draft. Obviously, there's a chance the Heat don't keep the pick, but if they do, is there a certain player you want them to go after? Do you want them to look for a defensive wing, some scoring off the bench? Is there a specific player you've already kind of paid attention to or that you might even want us to look into? Any kind of feedback like that, we would love to hear, and we'll definitely try and respond to it in the next show. So yeah, please leave comments on YouTube, Spotify. Please like and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Follow us on Spotify. We appreciate all of you for tuning in. For myself, Micah, my good friend Lino, we will see you guys next time. And hopefully we will have Kevin Durant on the team. Thanks, everybody. Bye.